Hello, and welcome to the SMU Video Archive series. In this series, we interview members of the SMU community who can provide insight into the history of SMU, especially from the perspective of their time at the university. I'm Jo Faye Godby, and today we have with us Professor James Early, who has taught English at SMU for a number of years. Well, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jo Faye.
I know you've seen lots of history at SMU, and I know that you are particularly interested from the Department of English. And can you just give us a brief history of what's happened in that department?
Well, when I first arrived, the department still had a number of senior members, many of whom were SMU undergraduates, and that era was essentially passing away, so that we had the benefit of experiencing people who'd been there for 30 or 40 years and as students before that. And gradually the thing changed rather rapidly from a number of, maybe there's perhaps Marsh Terry is about the only one in the department now, a senior member who's an SMU undergraduate. So that whole sense of the place changed from a rather comfortable, perhaps slightly inbred institution to something that's very much part of the national scene.
Uh-huh. And so it's continued to change?
I think it's changed, and most people of my generation are somewhat grumpy about the state of English studies. But let me give you a little insight into the nature of the physical arrangement.
Okay.
We were all in Dallas Hall. In fact, I can remember the art school being up there as well, and going up and getting some help from Jerry Bywaters about an illustration for a book. This resulted in considerable crowding. I think the office that I was in, Ken Shields, and must have had at least 4 and perhaps 6 people with their desks crowded in this little office. And now we're used to individual offices and considerable comfort, so that there have been pretty remarkable changes in that regard.
I know you're glad for that.
Yes. The department, when I came, was in a very odd situation. It was in kind of receivership. John Hicks, who was brought in as Dean of University College, was running the department the year I was recruited, and then Larry Perrine chaired the department and got crosswise with the administration because he was unhappy about administrators being involved in educational decisions, and somebody mysteriously fired Larry overnight, and then David Coldwell was appointed chair, and David had a stroke rather soon, so that there was rather abrupt shifts in the leadership of the department in the first few years.
My goodness, that's incredible. So what happened?
Well, ultimately, I got the ball, and Joe Harris made me dean, and I did that for 2 or 3 years before I got into school administration. But in those years, it was very hard to build a department. We used to go off to the national meetings, and by and large, the best national candidates weren't available to us at all, and sort of the people we made offers to and accepted were about the 7th and 8th out of 10 people, or something like it. Totally different from the situation now. You can kind of pick the nation in terms of the top candidates, because it's now a buyer's market, and then it was very much a seller's market, so that it was very hard to gradually try to improve departments because of the difficulty in getting good people to come.
Mm-hmm. You got like Pascal Beatty?
Well, Pascal was already here. Let me shift for a moment to the history department and give you a spectacular acquisition and how this came about. Hal Williams was chairing the history department and doing a wonderful job as department chair, and he got advice from Howard Lamar at Yale about a fellow teaching in a sort of second-rank institution in the California, San Diego State. His name was David Weber, and I can remember the conversation that Lee McAllister was dean, and I was helping him out. And Lee told Hal Williams, well, add a little bit to what you're going to offer him, make it attractive. And whatever we invested in David Weber has much more than paid off. And I thought that gives you a little insight into what a good dean can do in terms of spending whatever money he has.
Well, that was a marvelous improvement
Yeah,
for SMU,
yeah.
wasn't it? Great appointment.
You know. Well, when I came to SMU, the institution was very much in transition. A number of things had just happened. There was a decision to add an art school. There had been a negative decision to not let the TI group turn SMU into what became the Research Center for the Southwest, and then UTD. The science library is a relic of that, but essentially they took their money and went off and founded their own institution. I guess that Willis and others decided that it was too much of a wrench for SMU to amalgamate itself with that, but there also was the master plan which was underway when I first came, and a new curriculum, and so a good deal of excitement in curricular ways just at the start. In a brand new art school, I think as far as I can remember, Willis had all the new people around for a formal dinner, and everybody made a little speech where they came from and so on. I think the group included Kermit Hunter and Dick Rubottom, and also Burnett Hobgood, who was the founder of the great days of the theater department, so that a lot of things really happened. And later the physical art school grew. I can remember Bob Hope out back with a shovel, symbolically breaking the ground for the thing.
Right. It was exciting at that time.
That clearly, I don't know who made the decisions to have an art school. We had fragments of it.
Well, we'd always had an art department.
Yeah.
As long as I remember.
And clearly it was a kind of rather impressive efforts in music in particular, and clearly Jerry Bywater, someone who's...
So we were kind of a fine art school.
Yes, I mean, at least the seeds of it were there, and then the decision to have a freestanding school occurred before I came, but the thing actually developed when I was here in the first few years.
Rather than have a technical school, we opted the other way.
That seems to be the case. The great school at SMU in those days was the Theology School. Merriman Cunningham had come in and built up that great young faculty. They were all more or less my contemporaries, and very few of them are left now. And intellectually, Perkins is not what it used to be, but that's the nature of a university. Some places, some things get better and some get worse, and ups and downs, departments and schools. But
it was really a leading institution, wasn't it?
I mean, they had the great physical resources the Perkins and the Bridwells gave them, but they had in Merriman Cunningham a great talent scout who collected the remarkable faculty, and some of them internationally distinguished, like Schubert Ogden, who might have been the great star of the whole faculty in those days. I remember Catholic theologians coming down to Perkins to study Schubert, not just to study with Schubert, but he was important enough so they were interested in coming down to write monographs on Schubert.
That was an exciting time too for the theology school.
Yes, it certainly was.
So, how do you feel about the business school and the theology school and?
Well, the law school, I think, has pretty well held its place. A pretty good law school over my years. It was that already, and I don't get any sense of immense progression. The business school had a great period of change and recruitment. In fact, the whole administration in those days had a rather peculiar pattern that the central administration has never had the resources to direct much, so that there was a certain trust in the free enterprise system of the different schools, and the deans, some of the deans were known as racehorse deans. They were going to race off in different directions, and certainly the business school, the engineering school in my day, early day here, were very much in that pattern, and I think they did some good, but they also did some things that weren't very well advised. For example, the dean of the engineering school would poor mouth say, our physics department, our math department, and
Oh dear.
this was not the way to build a across-the-board university. It may have scored some points for him, but I think in the long run was pretty destructive.
Were they in competition?
They weren't in competition, and in truth, our physics department, math department weren't very good, but telling supporters that they're not any good instead of trying to cooperate with them and improve the thing was pretty destructive.
Did he leave?
He left. He became president of an engineering institution in Illinois, and in many ways was an admirable dean, but did resort to that kind of inter-school warfare that I found pretty troubling.
Did you feel sometimes that the School of Humanities and Sciences was a stepchild?
Oh, very much so. The Central College has always been something of a stepchild, in part because it doesn't have a ready-made clientele like the Dallas business community, the Methodist Church, the law community, that kind of thing. And unless somebody is at the center beating the drum and pouring out the dollars, it's very hard for the central liberal arts fields to compete with the more practical ones that have natural clientele, so that until we got the wonderful gift from the Dedmons in fiscal terms, the college was very much a poor relation with the great Meadows gift for the new art school and the wonderful support that the business community has always given the business school.
And how much was that gift?
As I heard, it was $20 million, which in those days was an immense sum of money, and I think, unlike some gifts, was readily available at the start. Sometimes you get a great gift, but it comes in rather gradually.
Well, how was it used? Did you participate any in that?
No, I'm sorry, Joe Fay. Both these gifts, both the Dedmon and the Meadows gifts, were about the same amount of money initially, about 20 million, and I don't really know too much about the actual distribution of the Dedmon gift, which did come in rather gradually. I think it was $1 million a year kind of thing, as opposed to Meadows, that the immense amount was ready.
I guess the question I'm asking is, do you think it brought in better students, or did it bring in more faculty, or better?
Well, I think in marginal ways it helped keep the ship afloat. I don't think it did any overwhelmingly dramatic things. Maybe at a place like Emory, where they got $100 million from a Coca-Cola person, you could do radical things, but most universities are perpetually scratching for funds, and I can't point to anything overwhelmingly dramatic. I'm sure that there have been professorships like David Weber, I think, is the Dedmon professor, and certain concrete things like that, but mostly just across the board, you can do things a little bit better than you could otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Well, it certainly was the first significant gift we'd had for that.
Yes, and Bob Dedmon has continued to do wonderful things. I was immensely impressed with his support for the biology building. It isn't though that Bob was a particular fan of biology, but felt that somebody had to step up and make that possible.
I didn't know it was biology. I thought it was supposed to be mixed.
Well, it may be health sciences, but I think of it, my art backward way is primarily biology. It isn't physics and chemistry. It is primarily life sciences, anyhow.
It's called Life Sciences Building.
That may be the case.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting, because I just had heard it called the Science Building.
Yeah.
New Science Building.
Well, they're going to redo the Fondren Science to some extent to take care of physics and chemistry, so they'll have the whole building to themselves. But
oh, good. So we'll have two buildings.
Yeah, right. As well as the Heroi flank that takes care of 3 other departments.
Well, when I came to work at SMU, there was a lot of talk about the master plan.
Yes.
Can you comment on that?
Well, it all happened before I arrived, but one of the things that came out of it was the general education curriculum. And that had some rather wonderful side effects as well. We had a remarkably good course for all freshmen called The Nature of Man, which was a very comprehensive course dealing with men and women from almost every conceivable academic perspective. And we didn't feel competent to teach that fully, and so we imported an anthropology department headed by Fred Wendorf in part to staff that course. So one of our star departments over the years has clearly been anthropology, and this all came because of the curricula changes.
Is that right?
Nature of
I
Man
didn't know
course.
that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So, because Fred's been very distinguished, and also he has a very good staff.
And I saw Fred on the steps just the other day. He'd just gotten back from Egypt. Fred is, I expect, about as old as I am, certainly in his middle 70s, and still going off for winter trips to Egypt in the desert.
Well, I think he owns part of it. He's really been outstanding. And I think SMU has one of the best departments in that field.
Well, at one time it was rather heavily weighted towards archaeology. They had really remarkable archaeologists, Fred and Tony Marks and others, and more recently with Carolyn Bertel, who's chairing the department now, the other parts of ethnology become more on par with archaeology. So I think it's a quite good department across the board
and
these days.
David Friedel has done a lot.
Another archaeologist, you know.
Are there any other departments that you can comment on besides that school?
Well,
or that
let me step back in the past a little bit. We were in a very peculiar situation when we arrived. The college was chopped up into two sub-schools. There was a graduate school of humanities and sciences and a school of humanities and sciences, and the favored departments which granted PhD degrees were in the graduate school, and Claude Albritton was the dean of that school. And basically, if other departments had one secretary, they had 3 secretaries and other kinds of things. The idea was some visiting expert from Stanford, his slogan was peaks of excellence. So you selected departments that you thought had the prospects of becoming nationally strong and nurtured them at the expense of the others. And regrettably, from the point of view of undergraduate education, the departments that were being neglected were those who taught most of the students, like math and English and history and political science and so on.
So which ones were accentuated then?
Well, basically, I think the first department to grant a PhD was economics. The new department with Fred Wendorf of anthropology. Another oddity, statistics had a crackerjack department, and math was allowed to dwindle away with, at the best, competent undergraduate teachers, but nobody of any stature nationally. And the other was geological sciences, Claude's old department. So that.
Oh, that's really unbalanced, isn't it?
Well, I'm sure there was a history to this. Claude at one time had been dean of the whole School of Humanities and Sciences, or maybe they called it Arts and Sciences in those days, and he kind of retreated into running the graduate school and then the Institute of the Study of Earth and Man, and then ultimately dean of libraries. Now, I don't know what discouragements lie behind that shift, but
that's quite a switch. And
Claude was a great deal superior intellectually to the administrators who were running the place when I came, but obviously something had gone wrong that led Claude to retreat in that way, and I never much approved of the graduate school arrangement, and ultimately with Jim Brooks and Lee McAllister, we kind of ended that and welded the whole thing together. But
well, now you were dean for a while.
I was dean for a while, and I was some kind of a dean for 11 years. So I was kind of privy to what went on in the school for the last years of its existence, before it was named the college.
Mm-hmm.
So that I had a sense of what went on there. And in some cases, we did some rather remarkable things. I touched on David Weber's appointment. The improvement in departments like psychology and mathematics that we managed to bring about were really pretty remarkable. There were other things that my successors managed. The great improvements in physics and political science were things that we didn't achieve, but would have liked to achieve, but kind of you can do what you can in a given year. But on the whole, I think the department by department, the college looks a great deal better now than it did when I came. I don't think there are any chronic weak departments, and there certainly were very uneven departments when I arrived.
So what about the enrollment at SMU? Did it, I know it peaked during the war, didn't it? Or right
Well,
after
I
the
mean,
war?
I'm sure that and almost everything we're talking about is in the national context that to some degree affects this. The post-war flood of students, the continuing through for a while, then a slump, and then the baby boom generation. And I think now we're on another crest, which someone told me, I think it was Judy Moraz, that that's supposed to peter out about 2007 or 8, and we're going to get in another diminishing thing. But on the whole, since I've been here, the student body numbers have not changed drastically. Somewhere around 5,000 to 6,000 in that range, and I think we've pretty much held our own in regard to student quality, but we haven't made the great advances in student quality we've always wanted to do. They've been immense. The honors program has good students as good as any institution in the country, but that's a few hundred students in a class, not what you'd like to do.
Uh-huh. Well, that's been a great addition, I think, to the school to have that honors program.
Yeah, that Hans Hillebrand, when he initiated that, was a really, I think, a very remarkable thing to have achieved.
And Hans was the president.
No, Hans was Provost under Jim Zumberg, as I remember it, or maybe under Don Shields, or maybe both.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure, but he certainly was under Don Shields for a while, because I remember that wonderful faculty show that was not much appreciated by Don. Luis Martin was, I can't remember, they were Sancho Panza and Don Quixote. And I guess Hans, the taller guy, must have been Don Quixote. Although that kind of reverses the authority roles. I'm not sure, but that they were paired anyway in the central administration for a while.
Did that go well? That
I don't think there's been a
production?
faculty show since. I thought it was good fun, but they were rather sensitive and thin-skinned. The jokes made at their expense.
Oh, well, I think I went to that, and it was really fun.
Yeah. I had a bit part. I think I produced a laugh on a one-line part. Can't even remember what it was.
Well, it was, it's hard to laugh at yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
So I can understand that. Well, we've had quite a parade of presidents. Is there anything in particular that, as a dean, you certainly must have been aware of the changes in their administrations?
Well, let's start with Willis, who was president when I came. And Willis, I already alluded to the racehorse deans and the chronic weakness in funding in the central administration. Willis tried awfully hard, I think, to keep all the balls, keep everybody happy, and did a pretty, he may have been the best of our presidents in many ways over these years, although not necessarily loved by some of the grumpier members of the faculty. One senior member of the English department used to, I think, attack him in class,
Well, some people didn't like it, I think, because he'd played football.
well, they probably held that against him, and then Willis stepped in the terrible fiasco, and the trustees abruptly fired Paul Hardin. Willis kind of came out of retirement to run the place and kind of hold things together very well. Paul was a charming man, but they didn't think he was a very good manager, I guess, and sort of after about 2 years abruptly fired him, and a real crisis for the university. And then Jim Zumberg came in and disappointed everybody by trotting off to become president of University of Southern California. I was at a dinner of administrators downtown. I think it was honoring Bill Stalcup, who theoretically was retiring. He later became acting president. But any case, the next morning Jim announced he was resigning. And it totally infuriated people like Ed Cox, who thought that he should be loyal to SMU in Dallas. But Jim left, and we had to settle for Don Shields, who had an unfortunate career, perhaps unfairly clobbered for the athletic scandal. I think many presidents lost sleep over what was going on in athletics. I know Jim Zumberg suffered with this, but man, it didn't break under his regime. He was able to get away before the thing broke, and poor Don got caught dreadfully. But then after that fiasco, and let me say something about the wonderful way the faculty held together, particularly Roy Howe as chairing of the faculty senate, keeping morale together, and we actually didn't lose much in the way of student enrollment despite the horrors of the thing. But anyway, they got this rather crusty, sawed-off, grumpy character from Duke, a very experienced administrator, Ken Pye, and he really set the place straight in many ways. He certainly wasn't a very much loved figure in certain areas of the clientele, but he reshaped the board of trustees and became clear that the president of the university wasn't a messenger boy for the people downtown, and did an awful lot of good structurally, and I think through his connections nationally, he helped us a good deal in the wake of the real shame of being publicly exposed. Not that many universities don't do the same kind of thing in regard to athletics, but we were really caught badly.
That was devastating,
Yeah.
I thought, at the time.
I remember watching the program on Channel 8, Dale Hansen exposing us and hauling out letters with SMU stationery that this disgruntled person they'd been paying, who turned out to be a bust as a football player, decided to, you might say, come clean. I wouldn't use that phrase for it, but anyway, it was a very bad scene.
Well, it's hard to look at those kinds of situations. Yeah. You don't know whether to say, but it was a good thing it happened.
Well, you might say that it was a kind of trial by fire of the university, that we could weather that kind of a thing and land on our feet with somewhat bruised, but go on with no great loss of anything that I could detect. I don't think there was a loss of financial support. We didn't lose massive faculty. We didn't have a student enrollment. It was a matter of hanging in there and the thing gradually easing.
Well, we often wonder, I think, about football's place at SMU, because with the Cowboys here, it's really hard to compete, and especially against big schools like Texas A&M. And
well, they won't even play us now, so that we don't have their fans to fill the stadium. So that there's a downside of that. But I don't know how much, say, places like Princeton budget to lose on athletics, and what our rather staggering deficit is. I'm sure somebody must know this kind of thing, how much you subsidize athletics in the institutions that don't have profitable big time sports, but I've never seen them published. Oh no, they certainly don't tell the deans. Many things they don't tell the deans, but anyhow, the dean gets the budget for the school, and that's what you work with. You don't get much sense of how the pie is cut up in the central administration.
So what about the SMU campus up in New Mexico? Is that
Fort Bergwin? Well, I've never been up there an extended period of time, but I have dropped in there, and in fact, one time was rather embarrassed. I was dean, and I'd stopped by the year before and made the director rather nervous by being around, and so the next year we didn't go over there. And then we ended up either at dinner or playing tennis with Bill Clements. And Bill Clements discovered I hadn't been over there. It's irate. It was one of Bill's pet projects, and you can't win them all.
It was due to his generosity that we had it, isn't it?
Well, it was partly Fred Wendorf's connection with a fellow who was in the lumber business, and I think he deeded the place to us. And then Bill was very helpful with building structures there, and of course he and Bill Heroy built houses there.
And their property is right next to it, isn't it?
Right adjoining it, yes. And I think Fred Wendorf has now got a place out there as well, but I don't think they've always been as generous to Fred and what he's accomplished around here as they might have. Fred's one of the people who really made a difference at SMU.
Yeah, he's a rare, that's certainly outstanding in his field, nationally and internationally.
And a tough East Texas farm boy in some ways, very much unaffected and direct, and very much himself, and quite well. Another thing that Fred would do, there's a fellow named Lou Benford who apparently, I'm an amateur at this, but made a decisive difference in the discipline of anthropology or archaeology, and founded the new archaeology. Well, Fred realized that Lou could be lured to SMU, but the administration couldn't cough up the money to get him. So Fred sort of brought him over anyhow, and I gather that Jim Brooks through ISEM managed to pay half his salary for a year or two until they could do it. Well, I mean, this is the way we build a faculty at SMU, kind of Jerry build the thing around a fashion like that.
More than one way to do things, so thank goodness we can achieve things like that.
Well, those things happen oddly. The one appointment that I made in English that I really was, apart from younger people, was Bob Hunter, and I wrote a note to my friend Al Kernan, who I can't remember whether Al was at Yale or Princeton at that time. In any case, he said that Bob Hunter is available for a job. It turned out that Al had been giving some talks at Vanderbilt, and Bob had told Al, well, I really, Anna is very happy in Nashville, would you see if you could do anything? So apparently the next week, my letter hit Al's desk, and we managed to get Bob Hunter to come in that way.
Well, that was good.
Yeah.
Connections count, don't they?
Sometimes. Other times, I remember writing to a friend at Harvard, and very disappointing response. He said, after I described the kind of person we want, he said, we all want people like that. No names whatsoever as to what you could do. So it varies. Good luck, but patience helps too. And there's been some rather remarkable people at SMU. Let me mention one of the great stars with the great French medieval architectural historian Jean Bonny, who was Meadows' professor in art history for a year or two. Immensely distinguished person, and he was just kind of in retirement, and we were able to get him to come for a year or two. Unfortunately, his health didn't hold up, and he couldn't come very long.
Well, mentioning his name makes me think of Lon Tinkle. I never did know Lon, really, but...
Well, that's another thing I might mention in regard to the English department. Shortly before I got here, there had been a small department of comparative literature that Gusta Nance ran.
I remember her
There was a
name.
compulsory course of literature in the sophomore year, and CompLit fielded a course for sophomores in world literature, which competed with whatever the English department was doing. So on that basis, they had a small department of comparative literature.
Hmm.
Now, what happened was that all three of them were kind of pushed into English. That was perhaps a year or two before I came, and some of them a little bit uncomfortable. Lon, in some ways the most distinguished of the three, was looked down on by some of the people in the English department as a kind of popularizer. I think that might be the safest way to put it. I remember I was kind of instrumental in giving Lon an endowed chair, and there was a sense that one of the senior members would be spinning in his grave if he knew that had happened, because he didn't. Lon was, kind of, he and John Rosenfield, the local ambassadors of the arts. Rosenfield doing all kinds of reviews, and
he did the Dallas Morning News.
Yeah, and Lon
columns.
running the newspaper side of that, as well as many other things. But Lon and I used to teach a course together, and I think I cooked it up with the name of the novel in the modern world, as the old general education program was slightly disintegrating from a compulsory year course into options, and we used to teach it in the big auditorium in the business school. And I remember Lon lecturing there with so I had some umbrella. I can't remember what the thing was. Pitching the umbrella to the kids in the front row, and really a very, very, very remarkable teacher, and a great guy in many respects.
Well, you must look back with pride on a lot of the things that you were able to help do. And I remember that when I was starting the Godby lecture series, that it wasn't called that, the University Lecture Series. And
well, we tried to help.
We didn't know whether we had enough people to do it or not, and you said, go ahead, and that saved us.
Well, we tried to do what we could for that, and certainly it's matured 1,000-fold, and it's all due to you, Joe Fay, and what you managed to do.
Well, it's turned out to be a help to the university, I think.
I mean, I remember Louise Cowan had her group up at UD, and quite effective in certain ways, but I think your program in the end was a much broader and more interesting program than hers. One other thing of that sort, I was involved in the Colophon Friends of the Library Foundation. Charles Richardson was the, I guess he was Claude's predecessor as something of libraries, and we all went down to see Deckard Turner, who knew how to do these things.
It was great leader.
Deckard was instrumental in setting up the first meetings of the board. The first board included Levi Olin, I think, Stanley Marcus, I think, and I'm sure Margaret McDermott. So we started out with
distinguished leadership.
That without Deckard's connections and savvy, we perhaps couldn't have done that. But it really got off to a smashing
Deckard was
start.
director of the libraries.
Deckard was a long time, not director of libraries at all, but thorn in the side of director of libraries. He was the director of the Bridwell Library. With the great book collection and
the Theology School library.
Yeah, the Theology School library, and
oh, he has some magnificent things in his collection.
Oh, Deckard was a wonderful guy, and I mean both the early printed books, the Incunabula, and also the primarily French art books illustrated by the likes of Matisse and Picasso and so on. He had some wonderful things, and I think the Bridwell is continuing under remarkable success with Valerie Hutchkins now.
She's good?
I think she's very good. I mean, there was a while of successes between Deckard and Valerie. Didn't have quite Deckard's skill, but I think Valerie is really first rate.
Marvelous. Well, that's great to know. Well, it's you think the library, the main library, is improved?
Well, our library you know, this may be true of other universities as well, but we have great strengths like the DeGaulier Library, and that's another story. Ev, the son of the original founder of the thing, wanted the thing to go to UTD, and Claude Albritton, with great skill, managed to convince his relatives to vote against Ev and keep it at SMU.
Mm-hmm.
And Ev behaved like an absolute saint, made peace with Claude and everybody, and died terribly young, but taught some course in the history department, business history, apparently with considerable success. And but saving that for SMU, I mean, I couldn't do what I've been doing the last 15 years or so without the DeGaulier Library here. But
marvelous collection.
Yeah.
Well, of course, he gave us the land.
Yeah. It's now the Arboretum.
From his home, too,
Yeah.
in his home.
Yeah, that was part of the gift.
Which we couldn't afford to
Yeah.
operate, and sold to the city.
Yeah, well, unless you had some active program of using the thing, it
Mm-hmm.
perhaps didn't cost a great deal. I heard the carrying cost seemed like a lot in those days, $35,000 a year, something like that.
Oh, really?
And that was a drain on the already tight fiscal situation. There just seemed to be no future for it. Well, they're happy to us that the city decided it was a wonderful place for Arboretum. The camp house next door, those two great houses and wonderful grounds. I think that worked out very, very well indeed.
Well, it's for those of us who attended SMU and worked here, I think that there are many loyal alumni out, especially in the Dallas community, and that it's been certainly broadened the lives. And the MLA course, would you talk about that a minute?
Well, I mean, we had various kinds of outreach programs at one time.
Continuing education.
Business town-owned Dallas College, a separate building, and now we have the thing out at Legacy, out in Plano, and a constant effort to try and interrelate with the community with programs. And the MLA program is one of these, aimed primarily at people who are perhaps have a bachelor's degree and want some broad general culture. It isn't a professional degree, but an admirable kind
Masters
of
of Liberal Arts.
Yeah, Master of the Liberal Arts.
Well, I think there have been so many people who've gone through those continuing education courses that it's brought them to the university.
Oh, you think of Luis Martin holding forth, and one of the people in his class was Eddie Kahn. The whole Kahn professorship coming from that.
They liked his teaching so well they decided to endow his chair.
Yes, indeed.
And that wouldn't happen to many people.
Well, that's another thing that perhaps is attenuated now, but at one time rather remarkable rapport between the Jewish community and SMU, and the wonderful gifts that we've had from the Kahns and a number of others. But
the Jacobuses?
The Jacobuses, several members of the Kahn family, Eddie and Louise, and also his brother and sister. Stephen, yeah, right. At my age,
and
I don't
Fanny.
always come up with names.
Stephen Fanny Kahn.
And the kind of relationship we had with Levi Olin. He had an office down at Perkins, and it's been a rather remarkable situation.
Well, it certainly has been good for SMU,
yes.
And I think they've enjoyed it too.
And I mean, speaking of public relations, there's very few people who've done a better job than you have, Joe Fay, in regard to nurturing the relations between the university and the people who would like some education.
Well, I guess that I got that from my dad,
Yes.
who worked for the National Conference of Christians and Jews before he came to SMU.
Yeah.
And he really had many, many good friends.
Well, while we're at it, let's mention another noble fellow who worked with you and with me, Bennett Miller, in the years he was at SMU, and good things Bennett did.
I remember when he came right out of the war on poverty, of which he had been a successful businessman, and then he decided that he needed to do something more with his life, and became the director of the war on poverty, in which he had quite a struggle.
Yeah.
And he said one time, he said, "Well, I think I'm not the right color." And now he's doing historic preservation.
Yeah, winning all kinds of awards for the redoing of the places downtown for apartments and so on.
So anyway, he did his part, didn't he?
He wasn't here long, but did good things. It was nice to have people like that move through.
It's strange. We used to have funds coming from the federal government for urban studies, and that was during Lyndon Johnson's administration. And then we had an election, and Johnson went out, and then they cut those funds, and then they added environmental funds. So you had to shift if you wanted to get a grant.
Yeah. Well, I remember Bennett being at least the instrument for declaring the SMU buildings on the National Register of Historic Places.
Oh, that's right. He did. That's great that he did
Sign
that.
on the front of Dallas Hall and other places.
Well, we've been blessed with lots of good people at SMU. Do you have any other comments that you'd like, of any areas that you think of that we haven't discussed?
I'm running a little blank at the moment, Joe Fay. Let's see if I can
Well,
touch on.
Since you were chairman of the Department of English, how many times?
Well, I did two stints.
2 cents?
Once after I got out of the deaning in one way or another, there was some kind of crisis. They didn't feel the younger generation were quite ready for the job, so asked me to do it for a couple of years. I guess Hal was dean still at that time. But let me say something about the deans of the college. They've been a remarkably diverse bunch, from Joe Harris through Jim Brooks and Lee McAllister and me and Hal, and on it goes. And despite their immense diversity, I think they've all done a pretty darn good job as they saw it. Some of them were somewhat infatuated with themselves, others very much down to earth, but everybody that I think of there in those 30 years or so is
really achieved.
Really brought the school along. No fiascos in the whole crew.
And Jimmy
Jones. And now Jasper. And
Jasper Neil.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think it's interesting, the diversity of people and how they're able to contribute.
And I mean, nobody's been there very long, not the sense of the length of time Joe Quillian was at Perkins, say, but and in 5-year stints, or in some cases a little longer than that, I think everybody has come in and they kept things moving, worked on the same old problems, and managed out of the 10 or 12 problems you got, solve 2 or 3 of them, and then the next person comes along and is able to do that also.
Well, we have a new president now who seems to be well liked.
Yeah, I think that it's a very nice fix. I mean, I only know this kind of secondhand, but with Gerald's real skills for administration, public relations, and the good working relationship he has with Ross Murphy, whom I have very high regard personally in terms of academic standards. I think it's a very happy relationship, and I think finally the Provost office has managed to assert a degree of power over the schools. The old system I described, where you had the racehorse deans and often trustee patrons. I can remember a friend of mine who was an associate dean in engineering describing Mark Shepard and the then dean of the engineering school, going in to bait the provost, who was my friend Neil McFarland, and poor Neil suffering from that kind of ganging up with the dean and trustee support. And I think all that's very much in the past. It's part of the university in transition, university growing pains. But that was the kind of thing that was going on when I first came, and it's, I think, inconceivable in the present situation.
So you're talking about sort of political pull, having influence?
Having influence in the sense of particular trustees not being much interested in the university as a whole, but interested in the particular schools, certain kind of projects. I mean, inevitably, trustees have interest, but the sense of no sense of restraint or balance is another.
Right.
And my, again, distant sense of the difference between the way Mark Shepard behaved and the way Jerry Junkins behaved, were perhaps more influenced generally. It seemed to me he was really concerned with the university as a whole. And I think that's perhaps one of the chief things that we've had in these years is going towards a sense of a total university. We may not be fully there, but I think real gains have been made.
What is Jerry Junkins' profession?
Jerry Junkins died abruptly. He was an immensely effective CEO, if I use the jargon, of Texas Instruments, and he led the search that found Gerald.
Oh,
and
really?
I remember there was a great deal of criticism of that because the faculty normally had about a third of the members, and they cut them down to one or something. Faculty would, one faculty, one student, and one staff, or something like that. It's outraged the faculty. And Jerry Junkins braved the faculty, had an open meeting, and if he didn't appease them totally, at least you felt you had a human being who was willing to face the music on the issue. I had great respect for Junkins, both a good choice of Gerald and the willingness to not hide in the corporate office, but come out and
defend,
talk to the faculty, and then to suggest that, well, if he couldn't change the committee that had been picked, but at least the faculty get consulted down the line, in the sense that at least someone was listening. I think that was a good thing.
Well, those human relation things really play a part, don't they, in the development of the university?
I mean, faculties are endemically paranoid, with the sense that power brokers are manipulating things and they're powerless, they don't get paid, and so on. And anything can be done to suggest the place a bit more open, they're listening to them, it helps. And I was greatly, it was a sort of terrible blow to Texas Instruments that Jerry Junkins died, but also a blow to us because he was
a great supporter.
And someone who had a real sense of what a university ought to be.
Well, I think that's a nice story to end on. Do you?
That seems fine.
All right.
Celebrate Jerry Junkins.
I've enjoyed this discussion so much, and we'll look forward to another visit soon.
Well, thank you, Joe Fay. I covered some territory anyhow.